And we'd like to welcome now to the microphone Terry Walker to tell us a little bit about the girls. This man knows more about them than anyone on the face of the earth. So welcome, Terry Walker.
Thanks very much. I've put my cheaters on for a start. And I do want to re-mention the role that Gordon Adelin played in this. It was actually in 2007 when Gordon first put the information in the article, and we met over coffee. We both had the same passion, and that was to get the story out that had obviously been deeply buried, excuse me, and also to see that a proper monument would actually occur. And the story is out, the monument's here, the Chronicle has played a large role, Gordon, Chris Brewer, and the support from the Chronicle, and I really appreciate that. Since 2007, July the 21st, whatever the day was, I have been gathering information on the tragedy that occurred exactly 100 years ago as we speak. 4 o'clock was the time when the flash fire actually got started, and I think right now it's about 4:08. So we're talking just about exactly 100 years ago. And as most of you know, the flash fire that occurred took the lives of 8 young, I'll call them girls/women, and later referred to them as the girls, took their lives, most of them instantly, and one of them a little bit later. All of them were in the age group from 14 to 20, with 7 of them actually still being teenagers in the range of 14 to 18 years of age. You also probably know the fire started other side of the hill on Coal Creek Road. Things are very different then, of course, in terms of any kind of putting out fires, getting people to the hospital, all of that. And the one that was blown out of the powder packing room survived for a while, but wound up at St. Helens Hospital and passed away about 11 o'clock that night. With what I'd call limited time today, both with the sun and the fact that we're trying to not make people stand too long, my comments are going to be pretty much about the girls and their families. And I guess we all know this. The more I research it, I realize how different things were in 1911. And a lot of us go through hardships now with our families, but these families went through considerable hardships even before this tragedy. I would like to start, and what I'm going to do is say a little bit about each of the 8 girls. I'd like to start with Ada Gilmore, 16 years of age. She was born in Indian Territory in Oklahoma, in an area known as Seminole Nation, to her parents, John and Maddie Gilmore. They still lived there in 1910. Very similar to a lot of the girls, they didn't come here until right before they were actually working at the powder company. In 1910, by that time, her mother had died, and she was living with her sister Jessie and her father. They then moved, at least the girls moved, to the Chehalis area and wound up living with an older sister and her husband, James Wilson. The sister that was there that came with her, Jessie, was actually at the powder plant that same day, came to work, at lunch fell ill, and wound up not returning to work, which ultimately, without a doubt, saved her life. Sadie Westfall, 16 years of age, Tucker County, West Virginia is where she was born to Samuel and Ida Westfall. Her father came here with her in 1909. He actually remarried to Katie Westfall, who gave birth to twins in June of 1911. The family suffered a great loss when both of the twins died at ages 2 months and 3 months of age only a couple months before the powder plant tragedy. It's hard to picture going through one of those episodes without three of them in a matter of a couple months. Matilda Rosbeck, better known as Tilly Rosbeck, was 18. She's from Pulaski County, Virginia, born to parents Christian and Mary Rosbeck. They also lived in Kansas and then up in Alberta, Canada, in the Blairmore area. And actually, the family was still there during the 1911 census in Canada. She came down to live with her sister, who was married to Harry Knaus, a last name that I pronounced incorrectly, but somebody locally got me squared away. They came in 1911, August, and at the time that the tragedy occurred, Tilly's fiance, Sam Patton, was on his way to Chehalis. He had gotten as far as Spokane. That was their last communication. And he was on his way to marry her and to settle down. Tilly had recently written her family that was still up in Blairmore, Canada, and had told them how she was excited both about her work and also about her upcoming marriage. Ethel Elmira Tharp, at age 20, she was the only one born in Washington State. She had lived in the Hoquiam area for a while, and then the family was also in the Chehalis area for years. At one time, shortly after the tragedy, I noticed an article where there was 5 generations of Tharps living in the Chehalis area. She was born to Benjamin and Clara Tharp, and the thing that, and this is kind of a rough part, but she was identified by the fact that she had a distinct ring on her finger. Identification of the victims was really difficult just because of the intensity of the fire and all that, but they were able to identify her, and she is also buried in this cemetery at one of course, several unmarked graves. She had also lost a brother previously in a gun accident. Fanny Vera Mulford, at age 14, was the youngest age of the girls, born in Arkansas to Arthur and Ella Mulford. Arthur was a postal carrier in Chehalis for years, and a co-worker of Vera's, and I said Fanny, she was known as Vera, a close neighbor of Vera's, and also her best friend, was on Geary Street, just here in Chehalis, and they were actually described as being like sisters. They would go to work together, and they were basically inseparable. After Vera's 4-year-old sister, Catherine, died of appendicitis on September 28th, 1911, which is a month and a couple days before the tragedy. Bertha Ellen Crown, the neighbor of Vera Mulford, was born in Missouri to William and Elizabeth Crown. Her father was a farmer and then was a carpenter when he lived in the Chehalis area. Bertha was the only one that was not among the 7 girls that were trapped behind the powder bench when the flash fire occurred. She was actually blown through a door by the railroad siding, along with several men that were in that area. And her injuries, of course, as I mentioned before, were severe enough that she passed away at St. Helens Hospital that night at 11 o'clock. Since both Bertha and Vera were under the age of 16, the powder company was fined almost $1,300 for violating the new state law that just had gone into effect. Bertha Elora Jane Hagel, which is one more name than I have in mind, but went by Bertha. She was 16, born in Sanilac County, Michigan, to Nelson and Mary Hagel. By the time they got to Chehalis, her mother was twice widowed, in dire financial straits, had a 7-year-old son, Frank, that at that time they said he was handicapped. He obviously had some serious health issues and a young daughter. They depended on Bertha's money for the family to survive. And so after the tragedy, the community got together and did some fundraising and was able to raise enough money to fulfill what Bertha's family wanted, and that was to move to California to live with relatives down in the Los Angeles area. Last but not least, of the girls is Nancy Ethel Henry, better known as Ethel Henry. 18 years old, born in Kansas, to Edward and Winnie Strobel. She was the only one that was married, and she also had a 6.5-month-old son, Elwin, that moved with her and her mother Winnie when they first came here in the summer of 1911. They actually wound up living with her mother's relatives, the Mahars, that lived on Coal Creek Road. Her son Elwin, after the tragedy, was raised by both Edward and Winnie Strobel in Centralia. And he went to school in Centralia, and as years went on, no longer was he known as Elwin, he became known as Al Henry, who, among other things, quite a few other things I don't have time to talk about, but he was a Washington State senator in the state legislature for 40 years. At one time, his wife and him were the only husband-wife legislative team in the state of Washington. And he lived in the White Salmon area most of those years. There's actually an Al Henry Bridge that crosses the Wind River down by the Columbia River. The 1989 obituary for Al Henry said that he had lost both of his parents to accidents before he was 1 year old. And we knew about Ethel, but there's been some uncertainty about his father. I haven't been able to totally pin that down, but that's what the 1989 obituary said. So, in concluding, I would just say that with all the hardships that these families have endured, it's all the more important that they be remembered. And I have no doubt that this will help.